Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name is Renee McKenna, and I bring my 30-plus years as a recovering addict and ex-crazy person turned therapist and shamanic healer to bring you snackable teachings on spirituality, psychology, and all things personal growth. And today I want to talk about the idea of never enough. And this concept runs two directions. We can consider that we never have enough, like the idea you can never be too rich or too thin, and our consumer culture and our desire to consume can set us up with a perspective of endless need, infinite choices, and a perpetual sense of dissatisfaction. Because at least from my perspective, that desire to consume or energy of consumption usually can't be filled by the information, the money, the power, the material goods, or the relationships that we pursue. So that's never enough from an inflow perspective. And the other dimension of never enough could be seen as the outflow dimension, in the idea that I'm never enough. I never do enough. I haven't achieved enough. That there's some endless carrot I'm pursuing that has to do with my own worth and value and how I move myself through the world as a person. Now, one of the tenets of Buddhism is that attachment and desire are the root of suffering. And that may be true, but attachment and desire are also the fuel for progress and evolution. And if we look at reality on this plane of existence, we're in a constant flow of infinite exchange. We breathe in and we breathe out. We eat food. It produces energy. We can store some as fat. And we excrete the rest. And this design is very instructive that we're supposed to take things in and put them out. It nourishes and drives our life force in almost every area of our life and puts us in a state of perpetual contact, integration, and conversation with the larger sphere, the universal life force. So we're supposed to consume and produce, just like we consume oxygen and produce carbon dioxide, but it's our relationship with consumption and production that causes suffering and discord and dysfunction from my perspective. And this idea of never enough is a perspective. Just like the old adage, when I look at a glass of water, is it half empty or half full? And when I view any aspect of my life as being enough at this moment right now, it instills an attitude of peace, gratitude, groundedness, and hope. And when I view the glass half empty, whatever the particular glass may be, money, relationships, property, prestige, then it creates an experience of lack, of need, and fear. If the glass is always half empty, I will never be satisfied. And being satisfied is an excellent place to be. I was talking with a good friend this week whose name is Thor. And we have a running joke, Thor needs to do more. And he was talking about how this internal dialogue that he needs to do more is how he pushes himself. And he's a super high-functioning person in almost every area of his life. But like many, many people, there's a constant sense of dissatisfaction, an inability to celebrate and acknowledge the tremendous success that he has. And the problem with viewing the world through the lens of never enough is that it becomes an operating system that is insatiable. I used to go to the dog races sometimes, and they have this little electronic rabbit, and the greyhounds chase it. And they never get to catch it. Now, the people who own the dogs and bet on the dogs might have a sense of who won, but I seriously doubt that that is the dog's experience. And although keeping ourselves in a position of perpetual dissatisfaction can move us forward, it comes with a pretty big price tag, that we never get to truly enjoy the fruits of our labor. My friend was saying, but if I let go of the desire for more, what will drive me? Maybe I won't do anything. And my experience is that is simply not true. I did a podcast on the inner critic. In fact, it holds a whole chapter in my book. It's podcast number 28. And this idea of not being enough, doing enough, or having enough is very similar to inner critic energy. I look at it as an old, outdated internal operating system, a personal iOS. And it may work to move me forward, but there is a much more efficient, effective operating system that's available to each of us. Of course, we need to be willing to let go of the old one first, but it's not about not having an operating system, not having a paradigm that moves us forward in a way we feel good about. For me, it's about having a system and an internal structure that moves me forward in a way I do feel good about. That feeling satisfied, satiated, affirming and feeling that I do have enough, that everything is perfect in this moment right now. Now, my mind, which spends most of its time in the future or the past, can be very resistant to that concept because my mind is simultaneously attached to its habitual way of doing things, even if it's painful, and afraid of the unknown. But the unknown is where creativity, progress, and new and better ways of doing things resides. If I'm unhappy with the way things are, I need to be willing to step into the unknown for things to be truly different. And when I'm willing to step into the unknown, even if it's the unknown of my own internal dialogue, to change my relationship with myself or the people, places, and things in my life, that act of open-mindedness, willingness, and courage actually elevates my consciousness. That the mere act of being willing to do something different raises my vibration, and the universe rises to meet me. Because from my perspective, this whole thing that we're doing, all of material reality, is an evolution machine. I love the idea that there's a tiny angel for every blade of grass whispering, grow, grow, grow. And I believe the larger consciousness system is doing that for each of us, whether we're aware of it or not. In fact, the whole purpose of my book, workbook, and guided audio, Allies and Demons, Working with Spirit for Power and Healing, is about guiding people to their own authentic connection with the larger system, the God or goddess, spirit of nature, your own higher self, however you understand source, to get our individual lamp plugged in to the larger circuit so we can bring the light of our own self into the world. And it's also about removing the blocks that keep us in the dark. And I see personal growth work as kind of an infinite loop of gathering power and purification, accessing more resources, letting go of what blocks our ability to use those resources, of plugging in and cleaning off the light bulb. And from a non-duality or Buddhist perspective, the highest truth or ultimate reality is that we are beings of light. And that what many call enlightenment is about realizing and embodying, experiencing our own true nature. Now, I'm just another bozo on the bus of personal growth work. I don't expect to get enlightened this time around, but my own desire for peace, prosperity, fulfillment, and connection is what drives me on that wheel of progress, of gathering, releasing, producing, that we're all kind of doing here as humans, whether we're aware of it or not, in our own quirky, brilliant, dysfunctional ways. And I don't think that's a design flaw either. I often talk about joy and pain as a really effective compass. Joy and desire pull us toward our own highest good, and pain, despair, and hopelessness, any form of suffering, is a call for change. Gets our attention. You go in the wrong direction. I also did a podcast on non-duality, number 51, What the Fuck is Non-Duality? Not an expert, but gave it my best shot to try to explain and describe this enormous esoteric concept. I've had the supreme privilege of being able to do some family counseling with mother-daughter pairs. And when I work with couples or families, I'll often see them together first, and then see them individually, and then come back together as a pair. Because in any relationship, there's a dynamic that's the relationship itself. A relationship is almost like an entity. And then there's what each individual brings to it, both constructive and destructive. And we always all have a part in both. And helping people recognize and take responsibility for that really allows that relational dynamic to change. And this one particular mother that I worked with who suffered deeply from this idea of never enough. She carried a deep sense of inadequacy herself, which she was always trying to outrun, but it also drove her to want to be a better mother. She was a beautiful and loving person. She said to me, "Renee, I feel like my life is a never-ending checklist, and I'm afraid I'm going to die with a bunch of boxes checked off and without really experiencing this amazing relationship with my daughter." And her daughter was an amazing person. I have to tell you, I don't think I've ever met anyone who wasn't amazing. Honestly, when you look deeply enough. But this woman was really confronting her perfectionism, her own unworthiness, and this perpetual striving that she was passing on to her girl, and she didn't want to do that. And it was causing dissonance and anxiety in this really beautiful and high-achieving high schooler. And we were able to talk about it together. And the daughter, of course, already knew this about her mother. But when they were able to discuss it and the effects that this never enough had on both of them, love, understanding, and compassion began to take the place of this driving, striving, always slightly disappointed, never enough energy. And it was really beautiful. And I'm not going to tell you that it was all completely resolved, but the dynamic between them changed dramatically. And they became able to name it both within themselves and between each other, and to discuss what was truly unmet expectations and needs, and what was this kind of insatiable drive for more. And so I encourage you to consider your own relationship with the proverbial glass of life in any area. Is it half empty or half full? In this moment right now, is there enough? And if there's truly not, what can you do about it? Or is there a hunger that cannot be filled? And if there's a hunger that cannot be filled, or a hole that leads to a bottomless pit that we're trying to fill with people, places, things, prosperity, drugs, alcohol, Instagram, news, the solution is to either dive in that hole and see what's really going on, which is what good therapy's about, and most good spiritual practice. Or maybe you just close that baby up and do it different. Because whether you believe it, feel it, or experience it, you are enough right now. And in this moment, no matter what is happening, everything is perfect to move us forward in our own evolution. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this podcast, consider sharing it with a friend or giving a good review on iTunes. Deep gratitude to my supporters on Patreon. If you want a free download of the first chapters of my book, there's a link in the show notes. And I'm doing Instagram lives a couple times a week at 9 a.m. Pacific. You can check me out at Spiritual Psi-Kology, spelled like this podcast. If you want to find out more about how spiritual psychology work might be helpful to you, or learn about my mentorship program, shoot me an email, info@reneemckenna.com. Blessings on your path until we meet again. This is Renee McKenna for Spiritual Psi-Kology.